Here, I made you some tea.
Oh, thank you.
I want to tell you about the last night I let my husband make me tea. Not because it was dramatic. Not because there was a fight or a slammed door or a suitcase in the hallway. But because of the way he stirred it. He stirred it the way a man stirs tea when he loves you. Slow. Careful. He even blew on it twice before he handed it to me. The way he had for 22 years. And then he looked at me. With those eyes I had looked into at the altar. Eyes I had trusted through 3 miscarriages and a cancer scare, and the night we buried my mother. And he said, "Drink up, sweetheart. You've been so tired lately. You need the rest." And I smiled at him. I smiled at the man who had been slowly poisoning me. Because here's the thing they never tell you about betrayal. It doesn't always look like a stranger. It doesn't always smell like danger. Sometimes it sits across from you at dinner and asks if you want more potatoes. Sometimes it holds your hand at your father's funeral and cries real tears. Sometimes betrayal looks exactly like love, and that is the most terrifying thing I have ever learned. My name is Diana. I am 53 years old. I was married for 22 years, and what I am about to tell you, the 112 nights, the blue vial, the hidden ledger, the friend who sat on my couch and held my hand while she helped plan my destruction. This is the true story of how I found out that the fog I had been living in was not burnout. It was designed. Stay with me, because the ending is not what you think. And there's something I found in my mother's old Bible that I believe may have saved my life. Something she underlined the year she finally left my father. I'll tell you what it was before this video is over. But first, I need you to understand how something like this can happen to someone like me. Because if it happened to me, with a career, a graduate degree, 22 years of a marriage I thought was solid, it can happen to anyone. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I need to tell you who I was before all of this. Because the woman I am going to describe, the woman who woke up every morning before 5, who ran a forensic accounting practice that employed 16 people, who coached her daughter's volleyball team for 6 years. That woman is still me. I want you to understand that, because when you hear what happened, your first instinct might be, how did she not see it? And I want to answer that before you even ask. She didn't see it because she trusted him. And because trust is not stupidity. Trust is what love requires, and anyone who has loved deeply and long has made themselves vulnerable in exactly the same way. My husband, Robert, was a high school principal. Respected in our community, coached Little League, served on the church board. He was the kind of man that other women would say to me, "You are so lucky, Diana," and I believed them. We met in our late 20s. I was finishing my CPA certification. He was finishing his master's in education. We were married 3 years later in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. My father danced with me to an old Stevie Wonder song. My mother cried. Robert cried. I am telling you this because I need you to feel the weight of 22 years, the weight of a life built together. The graduations and the arguments about whose family we spend Christmas with, and the Sunday mornings drinking coffee on the back porch, watching the birds come to the feeder we bought at a yard sale for $3. That is what was at stake. Not just money, not just a house, a life. The fog started about 18 months ago. I didn't call it fog then. I called it exhaustion. My father had died the previous spring. A sudden heart attack, no warning, and the estate he left behind was complicated. 3 properties, a business. Accounts I hadn't known existed. I threw myself into managing it on top of running my own practice. I was sleeping less. I was more forgetful than usual. I blamed grief. I blamed overwork. And I blamed perimenopause, which my doctor confirmed was real and present and would account for some of the brain fog I was experiencing. That last one, the perimenopause, was the detail Robert used most effectively, because anytime I said, "That's strange, I could have sworn I put my keys there," he was ready. Sympathetic. "Sweetheart, remember what Dr. Harrison said. This is normal. Your hormones are all over the place. Don't be too hard on yourself." He was so loving about it, so patient. He would bring me a glass of water and sit with me while I retraced my steps. He bought me a memory journal. He downloaded an app on my phone to help me track my daily tasks. He was building the file, methodically, carefully, the way a man builds something when he intends it to last. I want to pause here for just a moment and ask you something. If you have ever had a moment, even a fleeting moment, where you thought, something is wrong here, but I can't name it, where you felt like you were standing on ground that had just slightly, barely shifted beneath your feet, I want you to know that feeling was not paranoia. That feeling was not the beginning of cognitive decline. That feeling was intelligence. It was your brain doing exactly what it is designed to do. Trust that feeling. Trust it the way I wish I had trusted mine 18 months earlier. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November. Cold. The kind of cold that gets into the house no matter what you do. Robert had left for a staff meeting at the school, and I was home early because a client had canceled. His gym bag was by the mudroom door. I walked past it 3 times before I noticed the lining. In 22 years, I had done his laundry approximately 4,000 times. I knew the pockets of that bag the way I knew the layout of my own kitchen, but there was something about the seam on the bottom panel that looked slightly different, slightly thicker. I sat down on the mudroom floor. I'm telling you that detail because it matters. I wasn't standing when I did this. I sat down, like my body already knew I needed to be lower to the ground for what was coming. I picked at the stitching with my thumbnail, just 1 inch, just to see. The vial fell into my palm like it had been waiting there for me. It was small, no larger than my thumb. Dark blue glass, no label. The liquid inside was thick, not quite the consistency of water. Something between water and oil. It moved slowly when I tilted it. I sat on the mudroom floor for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I later checked my phone's call log. I had called my friend Patricia at 3:17 and hung up before it connected. The next call I made was at 3:21. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on the discipline of not jumping to conclusions before I have the evidence, on not letting fear or hope or narrative drive the analysis. Follow the numbers, follow the facts. So, I did not panic. I put the vial in a small Ziploc bag from the kitchen. I replaced it in the lining. I restitched the seam with a needle and thread. I made sure it looked exactly as it had. And the next morning, when Robert left for work, I drove to a private laboratory 40 miles from our town. The results came back 48 hours later by encrypted email, clonazepam and zolpidem, both in concentrations significantly higher than any therapeutic dose. Combined, they would produce heavy, extended sedation, memory impairment, cognitive slowing. In a person without a prescription who was being dosed over months without their knowledge, the long-term effects included difficulty concentrating, short-term memory loss, personality changes, and in some studies, markers consistent with early-stage dementia. I read that report 3 times. Then I went to the bathroom and was sick. Then I washed my face, made myself a cup of plain coffee, sat down at my desk, and started a spreadsheet. Because I am a forensic accountant, and this was now a case. Column A, date. Column B, what I had consumed that day. Column C, symptoms. Column D, Robert's behavior. Column E, anomalies. By the end of that first night, I had gone back through my memory journal, the one Robert had bought me to document my episodes. And I realized that the entries that described the worst fog, the heaviest sleep, the worst headaches, correlated perfectly with evenings when Robert had made me tea. He had been medicating me for at least 4 months before I found the vial. Possibly longer. The missing earrings, the vintage brooch my grandmother left me, the small bronze figurine that had sat on my father's desk for 30 years and disappeared 2 weeks after the funeral. Items Robert had said I must have misplaced during a bad stretch. They hadn't been misplaced. They'd been taken while I slept. If you are watching this right now, and you have experienced something similar, a period of unexplained fog, missing items, a partner who seems more comfortable when you are not functioning at your best. I need you to hear me say this clearly. You are not losing your mind. Document everything. Start today. You do not need to confront anyone yet. You just need to start writing things down. The journal Robert bought to document my decline became the first evidence in the case against him. The irony of that is the only thing that made me smile for a very long time. The easiest thing I could have done was run. Pack a bag, drive to my sister's house in Asheville, call a lawyer in the morning, hand everything over to the professionals, and let them handle it. I thought about it. I thought about it seriously for about 6 hours. And then I thought about what Robert would do the moment I disappeared. He would call our friends. He would call our daughter. He would tell everyone that Diana had another episode. She packed up and drove away in the middle of the night. I'm so worried about her. The doctors have been concerned for months. And by the time I could articulate what had actually happened, he would have established the narrative. He had spent months building a portrait of a woman whose memory and judgment could not be trusted. If I ran, I handed him the brush to finish the painting. So, I made a different decision. I decided to give him exactly what he expected. The confused, tired, grateful wife who was so lucky to have such a patient husband. I would perform that role so perfectly that he would grow complacent. And complacency is the only condition under which a predator makes mistakes. But first, I needed help. I had a colleague, a woman I'd worked with years ago on a corporate fraud case, who had since left the legal field and built a consulting practice around high-asset domestic disputes. Her name is Marguerite. She had a small, unremarkable office in a town 2 hours from mine, and she did not take walk-ins. I called her from the parking lot of a grocery store, using a prepaid phone I had purchased with cash the day before. She listened to everything I told her without a single interruption. When I finished, she said, "How much is the estate worth?" "My father's estate, approximately $4 million, between the properties and the accounts." "And are you the sole beneficiary?" "Yes." "My brother passed away in 2019. My mother passed before my father. It all comes to me." There was a pause. Then she said, "Diana, what you are describing is not a domestic dispute. What you are describing is a long-form financial predation scheme. Your husband is not having an affair. He is executing a plan. And if the substance results are what you say they are, he has likely been doing this longer than 4 months. She told me she had seen this pattern before. She called it domestically engineered incompetency. A target, almost always a woman, almost always one who has recently come into or stands to inherit significant assets, is slowly destabilized by someone close to them. The destabilization is documented, often with the unwitting cooperation of medical professionals who see only the symptoms and not the cause. Then, when the target is sufficiently impaired, a legal move is made. Power of attorney, conservatorship, or simply a transfer of assets under duress. The tea is the weapon, Marguerite said. The journal is the evidence, and the man who bought you the journal to document your decline is the one who will hang himself with it. We talked for 3 hours. By the time I drove home, we had a plan. Have you ever had to smile at someone you no longer trusted? Have you ever sat across a dinner table and performed a version of yourself because the alternative was too dangerous? If you have, you already understand what the next 4 weeks of my life felt like. And if you haven't, I hope you never do. But I also hope you hear this. The women who survive things like this are not extraordinary. They are ordinary women who made the decision to trust their instincts one more day. The first cup swap was the hardest. Not because it was technically difficult. The geometry of it was simple enough. 2 identical mugs set side by side on the kitchen counter. Robert always handed me mine with his right hand. When he turned back to the stove to get his own, I had approximately 4 seconds. The hard part was my hands. They knew what my face was not allowed to show. They knew what was in that cup. And for the first 3 nights, I worried they would shake. They didn't. I practiced stillness the same way I practiced everything in those weeks. Deliberately. Consciously. The way I had once practiced for my CPA boards. The way I had once practiced my closing argument in an audit deposition. You commit to the preparation. You trust the preparation. And when the moment comes, you don't think. You just move. Night 1. The swap was made. Robert drank his tea. I watched him over the rim of my cup. The cup that now contained nothing but chamomile and honey. And I watched his eyes. Within 35 minutes, he was asleep on the sofa. I had 47 minutes. I used every one of them. While Marguerite's contact, a quiet, methodical man named Thomas, who had spent 20 years doing digital forensics for a federal agency, worked on the financial trail, I worked on the physical one. I photographed the gym bag. I documented the vial without disturbing it. I went through Robert's home office with the systematic attention of a woman who has spent her career finding what people try to hide inside ledgers. What I found in the 3rd week changed the scale of everything I thought I understood. In a fireproof lockbox in the back of Robert's closet, a box I had always assumed contained his life insurance documents and our passports, I found a folder. The folder contained 3 things. First, a printed email thread between Robert and a woman named Serena, dating back 16 months. Serena, I would learn, was a paralegal who had worked briefly at the firm that handled my father's estate. The emails discussed, in clinical, impersonal language, the timeline for the competency evaluation and the transfer documentation. They referenced a doctor by first name, Mitchell, who was ready to provide the assessment when called. Second, a handwritten list of my father's assets, with a column for current estimated value and a column labeled liquidation target. Several items had check marks beside them. These were the items that had gone missing. Third, a business card for a care facility 3 states away. On the back, in Robert's handwriting, minimum 90-day intake, limited visitation policy. That was the moment I finally understood the full shape of it. He wasn't just stealing from me. He wasn't just planning to have me declared incompetent and take control of the estate. He was planning to remove me from my own life entirely, put me somewhere where I would not be believed, where my history of cognitive decline would be well documented, where I would not be able to advocate for myself. And then he would live the life he had decided he deserved. I want to stop here for just a moment, because if you have stayed with me this far, through the vial and the spreadsheet and the cup swap and the folder, you deserve to know something. He did not win. He is not living his dream life. He is not anywhere near the kind of person Serena the paralegal imagined she would spend her life with. I know you need to hear that, because what comes next is the hardest part, the part where things get worse before they get better. Hold on to the knowledge that the ending is coming, and it is the kind of ending that my mother would have called the Lord's bookkeeping. I have told you about Robert. Now I need to tell you about Diane. Diane and I met 28 years ago at a women's networking group for young accountants. She was funny and sharp, and she had a laugh that could fill a room. We had been each other's constants through promotions and heartbreaks, and the slow, specific grief of watching our parents age. She was my maid of honor. She was the first person I called after each of my miscarriages. When my father died, she flew in without being asked and sat with me in the hospital while I signed the paperwork, and she held my hand through every moment of it. She was also, I discovered on a Wednesday night in February, than the woman Robert had been texting on the private phone I had not yet found. Marguerite's contact Thomas had accessed a shadow account, a prepaid number linked to a name that did not exist, and the messages between that number and a second shadow number had been running for 19 months. The messages were businesslike. That was somehow worse than if they had been romantic. They were not love letters. They were logistics. The evaluation needs to happen before the probate closes. Does Mitchell need more documentation? She asked about the Riverside account again. I told her it was the grief talking. That last one was Diane's message. Diane, who had sat beside me at my father's funeral, who had watched me cry in the hospital waiting room, who had held my hand when I said I missed him so much it felt like a physical wound. And she had reported the conversation to my husband so they could note it as evidence of instability. I sat with that for a long time. I will not pretend that what I felt was anger. Not at first. What I felt first was something I can only describe as a profound loneliness. The specific kind that comes when you realize that a relationship you thought was a shelter was actually a surveillance post. I thought about every conversation I had ever had with Diane since my father died. Every moment of vulnerability, every time I had said, I don't know if I'm thinking clearly about all of this. She had held those moments and handed them over. And then, slowly, over the days that followed, the loneliness became something harder. Something with edges. I have a friend who is a therapist. She once told me, Diana, anger is just grief that has finally decided to do something about itself. I decided to do something about it. Diane called me on a Saturday morning, the way she always did. Her voice was warm. It was always warm. That was what made her so effective. She genuinely loved people in some compartmentalized, selective way that allowed her to betray them simultaneously. How are you doing, Di? She asked. Honestly, I said, I'm having a really hard week. The fog has been terrible. And there's this situation with one of my father's accounts that I can't quite make sense of. Robert has been so patient, but I feel like I'm just falling apart. Oh, sweetheart, she said, and I heard, underneath the tenderness, the very slight relaxation of a person receiving the information they needed. Robert loves you so much. You're in such good hands. I know, I said. I'm so lucky. And I hung up, and I wrote down the time, the date, and the exact words we had both said. Because in 3 months, those words would be read into a court record. If you are in a season of life where you are grieving, or ill, or exhausted, or in the middle of a transition, I need you to pay attention to who benefits from your fog, who grows quieter when you are sharp, who grows warmer when you are lost. This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition. And your ability to recognize patterns is one of the things that makes you formidable. Marguerite had a phrase she used during our planning sessions. She would say, "We are not building a case, Diana. We are building a museum. By the time we are finished, everyone who walks through it will understand exactly what happened here and exactly who is responsible." Over the following 6 weeks, this is what we built. The lab report on the vial, certified by 2 independent toxicologists, establishing the compound, the concentration, and the minimum dosing period required to produce the symptoms I had documented. My memory journal, which Robert had purchased and encouraged me to maintain, reframed as a dosing log with dates correlated to tea preparation and symptom severity. Thomas's digital forensic report on the shadow phone, establishing 19 months of communication between Robert and Diane, with a timeline that mapped directly to the escalation of my symptoms and the disappearance of my father's assets. Photographs of each missing item, taken from my father's estate inventory, cross-referenced with online auction records that Thomas had traced to 3 different anonymous seller accounts, now all operating from the same IP address. The folder from Robert's lockbox, including the business card for the care facility, photographed in place before I ever touched it. The emails between Robert and Serena the paralegal. And one more thing. The most important piece. My father's actual will. The version Robert had shown me, the one I had reviewed in the weeks after the funeral, during what I now understood was a period of significant chemical impairment, was not the final version. It was a draft. The final version, which had been filed by my father's attorney with the county probate court, contained a codicil. My father had added the codicil 6 months before his death, after a conversation with his estate attorney that I now believe he had because something had made him uneasy. I don't know what he suspected. I only know what he did. The codicil stated that in the event that the primary heir, me, was found to be legally incompetent at any point within 5 years of the testator's death, the entire estate would bypass the surviving spouse and be held in trust by a named independent trustee until such time as the primary heir either regained competency or passed away, at which point it would transfer to a charitable foundation my father had established 20 years earlier. My father had built the trap before I even knew I was in danger. Robert's entire plan, the sedation, the documentation of decline, the competency evaluation, would not have gotten him a single dollar. Not one. Because a finding of incompetency would have removed me from the picture entirely, and him with me. He had spent 19 months destroying the woman he married, and the thing he was trying to steal had never been available to him. I cried when I read that codicil. I sat in Marguerite's office and I cried for my father, for the quiet, methodical way he had loved me even in his last months when he must have known something was wrong. He hadn't confronted Robert. He hadn't warned me, perhaps because he wasn't certain. He had simply built a wall between me and the worst outcome, and then trusted me to find it. He always told me, "Diana, the best accountants don't just follow the money. They follow the story the money is trying to tell." Dad, I followed it. We chose a Thursday morning in April. Marguerite handled the logistics. Robert came downstairs at 7:15, as he always did. He was wearing the gray sweater I had given him 3 Christmases ago. He was carrying his phone and his coffee mug. He looked like any ordinary morning. He looked like my husband. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw the people in the dining room. 2 detectives from the County Financial Crimes Unit, Marguerite, my attorney, a woman named Patricia who had 20 years of experience in exactly this kind of case, and who had the specific energy of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by what people do to each other for money. A representative from the state's Elder Financial Abuse Division, because my father's estate brought this case under that jurisdiction. And Thomas, who was there to present the digital forensics in person. I was standing at the kitchen counter, holding a cup of tea. Plain tea. Just chamomile. Robert looked at me. For just a fraction of a second, before the mask went back on, before the concerned husband reappeared, I saw his face completely uncovered for the first time in 19 months. Maybe for the first time in 22 years, he was afraid, not remorseful, afraid. I didn't say anything dramatic. There wasn't anything dramatic to say. The documents on that table said everything that needed to be said, and they said it in a language I had spent my entire career learning to speak. He tried for 17 minutes to talk his way out of the room. He called me confused. He called me paranoid. He cried. And for a moment, I felt the old reflex, the 22 years of love reaching out to respond to his tears. But I held the cup of tea in both hands, and I let it pass. Diane was arrested at her home at 9 that same morning. She did not take it as composedly as Robert. Mitchell, the doctor who had been prepared to sign the competency evaluation, surrendered his medical license as part of a negotiated agreement and provided testimony in exchange for reduced charges. He had done this before, twice, in other states, with other victims. The prosecutorial trail that opened as a result of his testimony is still active. Serena, the paralegal, cooperated fully from the moment her attorney advised her of the scope of the federal charges she was facing. She was 26 years old. I am told she genuinely believed Robert intended to marry her when it was all over. He did not. He had told her what she needed to hear. That is what he did with everyone. The criminal proceedings took 14 months. I will not recount all of them here. What I will tell you is this. Robert pleaded guilty to financial fraud, elder financial abuse, criminal administration of a controlled substance without consent, and conspiracy. He is currently serving 8 years. With good behavior, he will be released when he is 64. I am 54 now. When he gets out, I will be 61. I plan to be somewhere beautiful, doing something I love, with people who deserve my trust. The estate has been managed by the trustee my father designated. I have not touched $1 of it for myself. The charitable foundation receives the income. That felt like the right way to honor what my father intended. Not to use his money to rebuild my life, but to use my own, which I have. My practice is still operating. I took 3 months away and came back to find that my colleagues had held things together with a loyalty I had not expected and will never forget. My daughter, who is 24, spent a long time being angry. Not at me, but for me, which is its own complicated thing for a child to carry about a parent. We have been in therapy together, the 2 of us, and it has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I recommend it without reservation. I live at my father's lake house now. Not because I couldn't go back to the family home. It sold, and I felt nothing when it did. But because this is where I feel most like myself. Most like the girl who used to sit on this porch and listen to her father talk about honesty and patience and the long work of building something true. I have a dog now. Her name is Matilda. She is 8 pounds and entirely convinced she is a German Shepherd. She sleeps on my feet at night, and I find this deeply comforting. I want to be honest with you about the things that still aren't better, because I think it does a disservice to survivors to present this as a story with a clean ending. I still do not sleep easily. I still have moments where I question my own perception of reality. Not because the fog is there, but because I spent 19 months being told my perception was unreliable, and that leaves a mark. My therapist calls it the echo. She says it fades. I believe her. I still miss Diane. Or rather, I miss the person I believed she was. The person I thought had held my hand at my father's funeral. That person may never have existed, but she felt real to me. And that grief, the grief for who I thought she was, is its own strange, quiet thing that I am learning to carry. Some mornings, I make myself a cup of chamomile tea, and I sit on this porch, and I watch the light come up over the water. And I hold the cup in both hands. And it is just tea. Warm and plain and completely safe. And that is enough. That is more than enough. I promised you, at the beginning of this story, that I would tell you what my mother had underlined in her Bible. The thing I found when I went through her things after she passed. The thing she had underlined the year she finally left my father, after 21 years of a marriage that had slowly become dangerous. It is from the book of Proverbs. She had underlined it in blue ink and written 3 words in the margin in her careful handwriting. The verse reads, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty." And in the margin, in my mother's handwriting, she had written, "Trust the knowing, trust the knowing." That is what I want to leave you with today. Not a warning about predators, though I hope this story has given you some things to think about. Not a call to paranoia, because the vast majority of the people in your life are exactly who they present themselves to be. But this, you have a knowing, a deep one, developed over decades of living and loving and navigating the complicated world of other people. That knowing has kept you safe in ways you may never be fully aware of. And it will speak to you quietly, sometimes just a flicker, a half second of wrongness, when something is not what it appears to be. Trust it. Document it. Do not let anyone, not even someone who loves you or claims to, convince you that your instincts are the symptom. Your instincts are the cure. I almost didn't share this story. I spent a long time thinking it was too private, too painful, too much to ask anyone to sit with for an hour and a half. And then I thought about the woman who might be watching this right now, who is waking up with headaches she can't explain, who is being gently, tenderly, lovingly told that her memory isn't what it used to be, who has felt the ground shift and hasn't yet named why. I made this for her. If that is you, you are not alone. You are not losing your mind. And you are far more capable than anyone who has underestimated you will ever understand. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for trusting me with your time. I will be back next week with the story of what happened to Marguerite, because she has a story of her own that I think you need to hear. If you want to be here for it, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I don't want you to miss it. I'm Diana, and this was the end of my nightmare. It was also the beginning of my life.